Welcome to this next module on Azure Active Directory. In this module, we're going to learn about Azure Active Directory, the various benefits it has, and the differences between Azure Active Directory and on-premise Active Directory. Azure Active Directory has several additions, and we're going to talk about them one by one and what benefits they offer. We're also going to refer to several terminologies in this section, for example, tenant, what is Azure AD Connect, AD Connect topologies, and the various authentication options we have. As we drill down about those options inside AD Connect, we'll also refer to something called as password hash synchronization and how important that is as far as synchronizing your passwords are concerned. What is password hash authentication, federation with Active Directory, password write back, and finally, how do you monitor your Azure Active Directory Connect with the health option inside the portal. A few more important things like Azure AD Join, where we got to talk about what device management inside Azure AD Join is, what hybrid AD Join devices are, and how do you configure Azure AD Join. As we speak and understand about these individual options, we'll also go ahead and run certain labs on Azure portal and see how you can synchronize your on-premise Active Directory with Azure AD. That's all for now in this module. Let's get started.
Before we start looking at Azure Active Directory, let's understand what Active Directory is. Active Directory was introduced with Windows 2000, and since then it has been used by several large, small and medium business companies as a centralized repository of users, groups, computers and organization units. You also get group policies so that you can centrally control these objects. Now, there are several applications that are dependent on this directory, and that makes Active Directory a centralized authentication system. That means there is no need for individual authentication or single point of failures or authentication happening at a lower level. Authentication is happen by or handled by a server which is called as a domain controller, and that hosts Active Directory. Now, since several applications are dependent on Active Directory, it also makes the domain controllers a financially significant system. And that means that if Active Directory at all goes down, it's going to hit the finances of the company directly. Most of the applications that we use today, like SharePoint, databases, applications, they are all dependent on this LDAP and are fully dependent on the health of Active Directory. The server that hosts the Active Directory is called domain controller. It's important to understand the concepts of forest, domain, and sites to fully understand Active Directory. Although Active Directory is a complex subject, the logical interlinking of various components in Active Directory makes it very easy to understand. If you are totally new to Active Directory, then I suggest picking up an off-the-shelf Active Directory course before starting with Azure Active Directory, as the concepts of Active Directory form the backbone of Active Directory in the cloud. If you are familiar with the basic concepts of AD, then you are in the right place to take your knowledge forward to understand Azure Active Directory. Now that we know about Active Directory, let's understand Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is a cloud-based directory, and that means that Azure AD or AAD is a Microsoft's multi-tenant cloud-based directory, and this will be providing identity and access management, role-based access controls, and single sign-on to multiple thousands of applications that we have in the cloud as on today. Just to list the applications in the cloud, we got O365, which is Office 365, Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics CRM, SharePoint in the cloud, storage solutions like Box and Dropbox. The list will be just endless. You'll have just too many applications being listed in the cloud. And the purpose of Azure Active Directory is to provide single sign-on to all the users that we have on your premise as well as in your directory. Azure Active Directory can integrate very tightly with your on-premise, and you can synchronize all your on-premise user accounts and groups to Azure Active Directory. Azure AD is highly reliable. As on today, we got 28 data centers around the world that Microsoft owns as on today, and they have automated failover. And that means that even if one of the data center goes down, copies of your directory data are live and are available in at least two data centers, and you can access your directory instantaneously without any downtime. In the next set of videos, we'll understand the different editions of Azure Active Directory and the end-to-end procedure of the architectural components of Azure AD. Okay, so we spoke about Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, and this particular chapter here is for us to summarize what we understood so far. Active Directory is on your premise in multiple geographical regions in multiple data centers. Azure Active Directory is in Azure's data centers. And the whole purpose here is to synchronize your on-premise Active Directory to Azure AD so that you can then access your cloud-based applications like Office 365, Salesforce, Dropbox, and several other hundreds and thousands of applications that we have as on today. By synchronizing on-premise user accounts to Azure AD, you are creating a single sign-on so that the users do not have to remember or memorize their credentials multiple times for hundreds of thousands of applications that we have in SaaS as on today. In the upcoming videos, we will see how you can synchronize your on-premise user accounts to Azure Active Directory and create a single sign-on solution and publish these applications to the users.
Azure Active Directory licensing. Do we really need to know about it? We absolutely do. As a solutions architect, you need to know what you need to pay for and what is it that you get for free. The business people and the stakeholders whom you'll be speaking with will really ask these questions. Do I really have to pay for all the rich features of Azure Active Directory and the security features like multi-factor authentication, conditional access, privilege identity management, or identity protection? I would encourage you to get familiar with the items that are listed here in this document. So let's say you're speaking with a company that is already using Azure AD and now wants to protect their identities. Then what type of license would they need? Maybe they need conditional access but do not need risk-based conditional access. In this case, they can just work with P1 license. How about a scenario where they need to prevent against risk events or they would like to use PIM, then they would need P2 licenses. Please take a look at this Microsoft article, and in this article, you would need to look at these headings and then map them against these columns. Everything that is checked under the free category will be available for free and you do not need any license. But anything that is not checked, for example, group access management or self-service password research for cloud users, is available in Office 365 apps, P1 and P2. So you can start mapping these headers against the categories or against the licensing models. So this is a quick lesson on licenses, but make sure that you get familiar with the licenses and understand what falls under the free section and what falls under the Office 365 apps, P1 and P2 licensing models.
Let's take a look at the various features and service offerings within Azure Active Directory. I'm currently logged into the portal Let's take a look at the various features and service offerings within Azure Active Directory. I'm currently logged into the portal, clicked on Azure Active Directory, and this is the place where I will land up. Now this is Azure Active Directory, and as soon as we think about Active Directory, we think about a domain name. Every Active Directory or a domain controller or forest has a domain name. The domain name in this case is your email address dot on microsoft.com. That will be your domain name as shown here. You can also find it out by just hovering your mouse over your name on the top right hand side, and you should see a pop-up. Right in the bottom you will see the domain section, which is your email address without any special characters dot on microsoft.com. That will be your domain. You can see the statistics of your authentication, user authentication by date right here. You can see the documentation about the changes that is happening to Azure Active Directory right here, and there are quite a lot of filters here. Depending on your interest area, you can check and uncheck these. So that ways you can identify the latest changes that are happening in Azure Active Directory. There are also quick links on the right hand side in order to create user account, guess groups, or integrate that with an enterprise application. Or if you would like to explore other capabilities of Azure Active Directory, these are certain quick links. If you would like to find user accounts or groups or enterprise applications, is again a quick search. Basically, this is a dashboard for Azure Active Directory. And as we move along this particular chapter in this section, we'll look at the various options that we have in Azure Active Directory and also synchronize your on-premise user accounts to Azure AD. Let's explore the user section in this particular chapter. Every domain has a domain administrator account. This domain, which is in Azure AD, must also have a domain administrator account. And in this case, the domain admin is called as a global admin. A global admin has full privileges to manage your Azure Active Directory. In this section, we'll learn how do you create a global admin account. In order to create a user account or a global admin account, you have to click on this button which says new user and then type in the name of the user. Let's say it is Joe. The username or the user principal name must always be username at domain.com, which is how the user principal names were on your premise as well. Now in this case, the username will be Joe at the domain, which is my domain without any special characters dot on microsoft.com, right? Now if I do not type these characters as it is, and if I have any typo here, then this will not be accepted because there is a validation. Let me show you quickly. So if I type Joe at microsoft.com, it will not be acceptable because I do not own microsoft.com, right? There should be a way to verify your domain. In the next section, I'll show you how do you verify your domain. But at this time, my domain or my temporary name remains as my email address dot on microsoft.com. In order to make this user a global admin, I need to go to the directory roles section and then select this radio button, global admin, and click on OK. Now make sure that we see the password and then copy this and keep it safely in a notepad. And we will send an email to Joe to change his password. So when Joe logs in next time, they will be forced to change the credentials. Now I will log in as Joe using incognito mode, so I do not use any cookies. I'll log into a website called myapps.microsoft.com. And this is where I will log in and change Joe's password. Now I'm simulating the behavior of Joe. It's as if Joe is logging in for the first time and he will change his password. I'll just copy the username because it's just too big. Paste it here. And the password or the temporary password is that. Sign in. And this time Joe will be forced to change the password. Type the temporary password and then the permanent password, which will be valid for a couple of days. Now this is how we have created a global admin who has full permissions on Azure Active Directory. Moving forward, we really do not have to use the root credentials or this credentials to log in to Azure Active Directory. Instead, I can use the global admin account to manage Azure Active Directory. We'll be taking a look at one of the very important sections in Azure Active Directory, which is the auditing. So if you look at these two options right here called sign-ins and audit logs, these are responsible to give us all the activities that happen in Azure Active Directory. Different kinds of activities happen in Azure AD. For example, creating user accounts, deleting user accounts, resetting someone's credentials, synchronizing on-prem user accounts to Azure AD. Well, the list just goes endless. There could be n number of administrative activities. The activities section here tells us about all the sign-in events, sign-out events, and things like this. So you will see the list right here. It looks like somebody tried to log in. A user called Joe tried to log in and the login was successful. But the first two attempts were failure. There are some more success attempts. One of them is a failure attempt. Let's just click on one of these failure attempts and see more about it. The request ID is the following with. The username that tried to attempt to authenticate was following. Also see the IP address from where the authentication happened and the location, date and timestamp, and the status that it's a failure, and the reason that somebody tried to log in with an incorrect set of credentials. So as we move towards right, it will also tell us about the device information that the operating system used was Windows 10 and browser was IE 7.0. You can also find more information in the audit logs. While auditing, information will be useful for the auditors, for the people who handle the compliances for the company, and the governance bodies. So here I can get more information about who created the user, updating the user account, changing the password using self-service, or did the admin change the password? Well, these are certain things that you can see in the auditing. This is very helpful for investigation and forensics purposes. Let's click on one of these events and identify what's going on. So I'll click on this update user and I see that some kind of an update happened and it was successful. As I move down, I see that the username called as Vijay was renamed to the admin, and this rename operation was successful, and this happened at the following date on the following timestamp. Similarly, you can find more information about rest of them, and this is something that can be found in the audit logs. And like I said, it's very good for investigation, troubleshooting, and forensics purposes in Azure Active Directory. You will also see similar set of tabs in groups. So any activities that are happening with groups, people adding to the groups or people who are getting removed from the groups. So these are something that can be found at the group level as well. In continuation to the auditing for user accounts and groups, we can also download this set of events using the download button here, or you can export it to the storage account. You can also link it to the Power Business Intelligence section. Let's click on the download option here. It will take a minute to generate a CSV file. You can save it as a CSV, but then manually downloading is not the right option. There must be a way in which this set of events that are being generated on live basis are streamed to storage account and maybe generating some kind of diagnostic reports or graphs or pictures in Power BI. Let's take a look at the export data settings. We need to make sure that your diagnostics are turned on, and thereafter All the events can be archived to a particular storage account which you specify here. You can also specify the retention period as to how many days it should stay in the storage account, because if you do not specify the retention period, it's going to just grow forever and then your billing will increase. So usually you keep the retention period based on the governance bodies or the compliance teams, and that's something governed by them. So we need to consult the governance team or the compliance team to identify how long do you want to keep the logs for. The other option, or rather say the third option, is the Power BI, which will just take us to an external uh, link. Although we are still residing within the Microsoft site, and we'll take a look at this section later on. But then Power BI is used to generate data out of data. This is more like an aggregation tool, will help us generate graphs and pictures and makes this data more presentable for troubleshooting purposes or even for pictorial representation purposes. One of the most important feature of Azure Active Directory is to synchronize your on-premise users and on-premise directories with Azure Active Directory. With that, you will have a common identity for all cloud-based applications like Office 365, CRM solutions like Dynamics, Salesforce, Box, Dropbox, and the list is endless. So AD Connect is a tool that facilitates synchronization of on-premise objects to Azure Active Directory. This tool has several features. For example, filtering, password hash sync, password writeback, prevention of accidental deletes, device writeback, and automatic upgrades. We'll talk about each one of them one by one in the subsequent videos. Let's talk about the first feature of AD Connect, which is filtering. Let's say we got about 25,000 objects that we want to synchronize to Azure Active Directory. And you don't want to do a big bang, because if you synchronize all the objects, then there could be problems with business approvals and there could be problems with something choking up the network as well. Filtering is used when you want to limit which objects are synchronized to Azure Active Directory. By default, all objects, users, contacts, groups, and Windows 10 computers are synchronized. And if you would like to change this behavior, you would choose the filtering option to choose what domains to synchronize, what OUs to synchronize, and objects with specific attributes to be synchronized and selected. So very granular filtering can be done, and you can choose which objects and what objects should get synchronized to Azure Active Directory from your on-premise. Let's talk about another interesting feature called password writeback. When you install the AD Connect tool with default settings, it will synchronize the password hashes from on-premise to Azure Active Directory. And this is one way. The password resets in Azure Active Directory do not take effect on your premise in default mode. Password writeback will allow the users to change and reset their passwords in the cloud and let that passwords hashes get synchronized back to on-premise Active Directory. So that way you can have your on-premise password policies applied on the cloud as well. Let's talk about password hash sync feature of AD Connect. The password hash synchronization is a service, is a feature of AD Connect that will let the password hashes get synchronized from your on-premise to Azure AD. The likelihood that you are blocked from getting your work done due to forgotten password is related to the number of passwords that you need to remember. The more passwords you need to remember, the higher the probability of forgetting one. And then you will land up calling the help desk. Questions and calls about password resets and several other password related issues will demand a lot of help desk resources. The password hash synchronization is a feature used to synchronize a hash of the user's password from your on-premise Active Directory instance. Remember that the password does not get synchronized. It is a password hash that gets synchronized, which can then be used as a sign-in feature for SaaS-based applications. When you sign into the service by using the same password, you're signing into your on-premise Active Directory instance because now that you have hashes synchronized to Azure AD, you reduce the number of passwords. That means the users need to maintain just one password. And this will improvise the productivity of the users and also reduce the help desk costs. You may want to choose ADFS optionally to set up password hash synchronization as a backup in case your ADFS infrastructure fails. Password hash synchronization is an extension to the directory synchronization feature. So apart from synchronizing users, contacts, groups, and Windows 10 devices, password hashes also gets synchronized. There is no way to convert a hash to a password. So even if someone tries to hack in and gets your hash, there is no way to convert the hash to a plain text of the password. You cannot use a password hash to sign in to your on-premise networks. To synchronize your password, Azure AD Connect will extract your password hash from your on-premise Active Directory database, and then certain extra security processing is applied to the password hash before it synchronizes to Azure Active Directory authentication services. Passwords are synchronized on per user basis in the chronological order in which they were created. Let's talk about prevention of accidental deletions in the next video. Prevention of accidental deletes. When installing Azure Active Directory Connect, Prevent Accidental Deletes is enabled by default and is configured to not allow an export of more than 500 deletes. So on your premise, if more than 500 objects are getting deleted, Azure Active Directory will prevent such deletions on the cloud-based directories. Common scenarios when you may see certain delete operations is by changing the filter where an entire OU or the domain is unselected. All objects in the OU get deleted accidentally on your premise. Or maybe an organization unit is renamed so all objects in it are considered to be out of scope for synchronization. The default value of 500 objects can be changed with PowerShell. If there are too many deletes staged to be exported to Azure AD, then the export stops, and then you will also receive an email stating that the number of objects that were deleted were beyond the threshold of 500 objects, and you need to confirm if this deletion needs to be processed. You will also see this status in the Synchronization Service Manager user interface. So Prevent Accidental Deletes is a wonderful feature that will prevent accidental deletion from Azure Active Directory even if they get deleted from on your premise. Device Write Back. This is a feature that provides additional security and assurance that access to applications is granted only to the trusted devices. So if any device is joined to Azure Active Directory, this will allow a device registered in Azure AD to be returned back to on-premise Active Directory so that it can be used for conditional access. Automatic upgrade. Automatic upgrade makes sure that AD Connect installation is always up to date. That means the binaries used for installing AD Connect must always be updated up to date, and this feature is enabled by default for express setting installation. This ensures that AD Connect is always up to date with the latest release. So when Microsoft changes its binaries in the backend, your tool installed on the member servers also gets updated. Now the default behavior of automatic upgrade is enabled. If you'd like to change the status, you can always toggle between automatic upgrade enable and automatic upgrade disable whenever you want it. And this is done through PowerShell. Let's start synchronizing some of our user accounts from on-premise to Active Directory. I'm currently logged on to a domain controller which I created somewhere. So the best way I would check this is this is a DC. I'll just go and type net space share, and that tells me that hey, it's a domain controller, right? Because I see netlogon and sysvol are shared. I've also created a couple of user accounts here in Active Directory users and computers console. So and named them as Joe, Mary, and Steve. So I created a OU organization unit called as IT users, and few users in there called Joe, Mary, and Steve. And my objective is to sync them out to Azure AD. The tool that we need to use to synchronize on-prem users to Azure AD is called as AD Connect, and we gotta download this from Microsoft website. The first thing that I'm gonna do is launch the browser, go to Google, and type AD Connect there. Now this big machine, it's got internet, so I don't have to worry. It's just get rid of those messages. Now one thing that I'm doing from scratch only because I want to show you these messages, and these are really annoying, and they will continue to pop up as long as you keep clicking on close, and it will not even let you download anything. So first thing that you have to do is disable the IE security policy on the server that you are um, downloading the tool from. So just turn off and off. So launch the server manager, and then identify where you got IE security enhanced policy, and then turn it off. I just did that. Yeah, it's turned off. I'll close it and just restart the browser. Keep in mind that in production environments, we never install AD Connect tool on domain controllers. This is usually done on member servers. Now, because this is just a test environment for demonstration purposes, I'm using a domain controller to do that. Now, the tool that I will use here is called as AD Connect. Download, and just click on this link, download Microsoft Azure Active Directory Connect from official website. And that's not a big deal, so all you gotta do is click on download, and that's all. It's pretty quick, very small utility, and gets downloaded in like less than 30 seconds. Depends, of course, depends on the internet speed. Now it's done. In the next video, I'll show you how to install the AD Connect and the various options in the wizard. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so looks like the tool is downloaded now. So I'm gonna go to the download section and just click on run there. And just wait for it to finish what it's doing. Basically, it's just gonna load up the binaries for the AD Connect, and it's gonna show up with the wizard. So we gotta punch in the credentials to synchronize the user accounts from on-premise to the cloud. Now keep in mind that we do not install this ever on a domain controller. We always install it on a member server. So I'm gonna agree to the license and then click on continue. And you got these two options if you would like to customize or use express settings. If you customize, then you got these options to choose your own installation location. If you got an existing SQL server, you may choose that existing service account or specify any custom sync groups that you may want to do. Well, I would go for express settings. So that's express settings. Now you have these options to type in the username and the password for the global admin account. You got to have these two things handy. One is the global admin account, and the second is how do you connect to the domain controller, because you got to have permissions to the domain controller, plus you got to have permissions to connect to Azure AD as well. Now we created a global admin account a minute ago, so I'm going to copy that and go back to Azure AD and paste it there. So this is my global admin account. Punch in my password as well. And then when I click on next, it's going to connect to my Azure AD and verify if this user ID and password is right. Let's do that. So connecting to Microsoft Online to verify credentials. All right, so now it went through, passed through, the credentials were right. Now it's time to type in the enterprise admin credentials, which is my domain. What's my domain name? So if you forget your domain name, what you got to do is open your command prompt and type who am I. Well, there's several ways to do that, but I prefer this way. I'm going to just copy that and be a lazy admin, paste it there, and then type the credentials for that user. Alright, looks like I did not type the right password and I forgot the password as well, so I'll quickly reset the password for this administrator. Alright, that's done. There was a minute job. Click next. Alright, so that's done. Now you gotta check this box. Remember that we do not own this domain. Let's do this local. Let's do this dot local is not owned by us. So there's no way we can verify this because we haven't purchased this domain. And if you purchase this domain, you gotta go and validate this domain in Azure Active Directory. Without validating, it will never let you sync unless you check this box. So you got to continue without matching all UPn's affixes to the verified domains. And we do not own this, right? So that's why you got to check this box. As soon as you click on next, it's going to do some configuration and it will ask you if you want to start the synchronization process right then or if you want to do it later on. I will check this box for now so that the synchronization starts immediately and then click on install. I will let this installation continue and wait for some time. Once this installation is completed, give it like 10 to 15 minutes for the users to show up in Azure Active Directory section. So once this installation is complete successfully, you should be able to see the user accounts called Mary, Joe, and Steve, which were created in Active Directory right here, right? So you'll resume the session after that. Thank you. Okay, so far we have created few users in Active Directory, installed AD Connect in Express mode, and then we are wishing and hoping that these user accounts that we created in Active Directory will be synchronized to Azure AD. Let's go ahead and verify that. I will minimize this RDP console, go to the user section, and see if I got the new users there. Alright, looks like I got the three user accounts, Joe, Mary, and Steve right here. All of these three are synchronized to Azure Active Directory. Now the source out here, if you look at the source, the ones that have Windows Server AD next to it, all of these are the ones that have synchronized from on-premise. There's a special account here which says on-premise directory synchronization tool. This is a service account and we'll talk about this in detail as to what it does, what's the purpose of it, and the naming convention and standards of it as well in the next video. The on-premise directory synchronization account. This is called as Azure AD connector account. This is an account in Azure Active Directory which is created for synchronizing the user accounts. This account can be identified by its display name, which is sync underscore the domain controller name. If your domain controller name is DC5, the name will be sync underscore DC5 followed by a GUID at the domain in which it is registered. My domain controller name is domain controller. So if I go here to my domain controller and then type hostname on the command prompt, well, that's my domain controller name. So it is limited by 16 characters, so that's what I got. So name of the server the account is used on can be identified in the second part of the username, and in this particular case it is domain controller. So if you have staging servers, each server has its own account. That means if you have multiple domains and every domain is synchronizing, then every domain will have its own sync account. The account is created with its own long complex password that never expires, so you don't have to worry about the password expiry of this account. It is granted a special role which is called as directory synchronization accounts, that is used to perform directory synchronization tasks. This is a special built-in role and should not be granted any other permissions apart from synchronizing. The Azure portal shows this user account as a user account and not as global admin or anything else. There's a limit of 20 sync service accounts in Azure Active Directory, and you can use PowerShell to retrieve the list of existing Azure AD service accounts in your Azure AD. Similarly, there's a PowerShell command to remove such accounts. So I'll use PowerShell here. In this case, the command is get-azure AD directory role, and I want to pipe it further, and I want to get just the sync accounts. So I will use the filter called $_dot, and the display name for the account is it is equal to what? Directory synchronization accounts. That's how it looks like. All right, let's execute this and see what happens. So this is the object GUID, directory synchronization accounts, only used by Azure AD Connect service. Let's try to pipe it further and try to get Azure AD directory role member and run that. So the object ID is this, display name is that, and this time I get the user principal name as well. So if I had multiple domain controllers and multiple things happening from multiple domains, I will see the list of Azure AD connector accounts in this list. And in this case, I just see one of them because I have just one domain controller from where the sync is occurring from. Let's talk about multi-factor authentication, also called as MFA. Now that we have created users in Active Directory and we know that users will log into Active Directory with their credentials, which is user ID and password. Now we know that there are a lot of evil eyes sitting out there on the internet, and we would like to make sure that even if somebody traces or intercepts our traffic and is able to get through the hashes of the password, they should not be able to get into the application. So a single factor of authentication is never sufficient to protect the application and your intellectual property. There should be multiple factors of authentication that a user needs to go through so that the application can identify the right individual has access to the data. Let's understand multi-factor authentication first, and then we will see how multi-factor authentication can be implemented in Azure Active Directory. There are 5 factors of authentication that we have as on today. The first one is something that we know, it's in our memory, and we have been using this factor of authentication from very long time. It's one of the oldest forms of authentication in the IT era. Passwords, PIN codes, your debit card PIN that you remember, you don't share it with anybody. That comes under something that we know. The second factor is something that we have, which is like an RSA token, a soft token, which is equivalent to a one-time password or one-time pads. So the numbers keep ticking on your RSA token. A good example is Google Authenticator. You can download this app from the Play Store or App Store and see how Google Authenticator works. The third factor of authentication is ourselves, something that we are. The measurement of our biometric traits like fingerprints, iris, facial recognition, DNA, all of these come under biometrics. Biometrics is bio plus metrics. Measurement of your biological traits is biometrics. It's something we are. The fourth one is based on your geographical location. You may get authenticated or maybe denied access. It's something where we are. Based on your latitudes and longitudes and your coordinates, based on your IP addresses, you may get authenticated or maybe denied access. The last one is something you do, which is based on your gestures, hand movements. That comes under something that you do. A combination of at least 2 of them is multi-factor authentication. So when you're trying to access your application, you punch in your user ID and also punch in the password. And then you must be presented with a secondary form of authentication, which cannot be the same as a password, which should be like something we have. Maybe you type in a one-time password from your phone or an application. So multi-factor authentication is having at least 2 factors of authentication. And in the next video, we'll see how we can inculcate into Azure Active Directory to protect our intellectual property and the applications. Okay, so now you know what multi-factor authentication is. Let's go ahead and set up multi-factor authentication for a couple of users in Active Directory. Now we have few users synchronized from on-premise to the cloud here. So we can see the source as Windows Server AD. And when we see the source as Windows Server AD, it means that they are synced users. The ones that have the source as Azure Active Directory means they were created right here. The ones with Microsoft account is a root account created here with full permissions in not just Azure AD but rest of the Azure world. Alright. By this time, you might have noticed that there's a multi-factor authentication button here. I'll click on it and it opens up a new tab. And this is where the list of users will be enumerated and I can select the user for whom I want to do MFA. I'll select Joe in this case and just click on Enable. Well, you may be thinking, if I have to do MFA for hundreds of users, do I have to click on each one of them and do one by one? Well, there's a PowerShell way of doing it. For everything, there's a PowerShell way. In fact, I always encourage people to do a PowerShell way rather than doing a GUI or GUI method, because that makes life much easier. Alright, so for this user, multi-factor authentication is enabled and you as an administrator is done with your job and your activity. Now it's Joe who has to choose the kind of authentication he prefers. I will log in as Joe, so I'll quickly launch in private mode. I'm using Firefox, so that's why I'm using private browsing. If you're using Chrome, you'll go for incognito mode. In Internet Explorer, it will be in private mode. So I'll quickly type myapps.microsoft.com. I'll be presented to type the user ID here, which is Joe at domain.com, and domain name is naresh26260 outlook.onmicrosoft.com. In production environments, this will be your custom domain. This will be your own domain, like accenture.com or maybe microsoft.com or your company name.com. Yeah. I'll click next. Now we type in the password like that. and then I sign in. Now you get this message which says your organization needs more information to keep your account secure, right? All right, so let's see what we get. Hit next. Additional verification options are required here, which the user has to choose whether he wants an authentication phone or an office phone or a mobile app. An office phone is an attribute in Azure Active Directory. So if you have the attribute called as office phone set up here, I'm just looking at the office phone right here, phone. So if you have a phone attribute here, the multi-factor authentication will pick up the phone number from here. But since we do not have this number here, I can select authentication phone instead of office phone or download a mobile app instead. Okay, so I'll select authentication phone, and since I'm in India, I'll select my Indian number and put my phone number here quickly. All right, now I should be getting a phone call, and I'll get my phone from the desk here, change the mode from silent to ringing mode so that you can hear it too to see what Microsoft says. I'll select call me. All right, waiting for the phone to ring. There you go, it rings now. So I'll pick up the phone and put this in speaker. I hope you can hear it.
Please press the pound key to finish your verification.
Done.
Your sign-in was successfully verified. Goodbye.
Goodbye. So I just hung up from the phone, and this browser should detect that that's my phone number and says you're happy. You can make a note of this app password. You may need it to integrate with other applications. So I got this error. There was a problem processing a request. So I will go to my apps one more time. All right, Joe's signing in. Okay, we're calling. So this time when Joe is trying to log in, is being authenticated with MFA.
Using the Microsoft sign-in verification system. Please press the pound key to finish your verification.
There you go, done. So I will be successfully authenticated to the enterprise applications, and Joe can now access all the enterprise applications that have been published to him. Although we'll see in the next set of videos to how do you publish the enterprise applications to the users, but this is just a demonstration of MFA, right? So just to recapitulate, first you need to get into the MFA portal here, go to the user section, click on MFA, identify the user, then enable multi-factor authentication for the user or users. Then when the users logs in, they will be presented with the kind of authentication they want. Once they have set up, moving forward, they will be getting the same kind of authentication. You might have noticed a few things, that when this user tries to log in with his user ID, he got a banner. Behind the scenes, he got a wonderful wallpaper. See, this is a wallpaper, but if I type that, see the background changes. So this can be customized so that it can be more focused on branding. That means I can put my company logos. I can also put a message like this, right? In the next sections, we'll see how you can customize this portal, put your own messages here, so only the right set of people can get in, and put some legal messages here, right? Thank you. Branding is very important for any enterprise or any company, specifically if they have external users or external vendors who access their enterprise applications. And users would like to see their own company's logos and brands out there on their enterprise applications. Microsoft Azure Active Directory has a way to put its own custom applications, put its own custom logos on the apps. So if you scroll down, there's some option called as company branding. We click on it and then configure it. We gotta make sure that the pictures that we import into Azure Active Directory comply to these image requirements. Well, you can put other images as well, but Microsoft just want to say is that the images would look at its best if the image size is equal to that. I've downloaded some of the pictures, but before that, let's go ahead and look at these options. So you have the option to put the banner logo, the background image, put a user hint there, sign in page where you can put the legal disclaimer, sign in page background color, square logos, so you can put pictures in various places. Let's go ahead and put the background image, and I've downloaded this picture of the shell from the internet, which is a beautiful sun setting picture. Alright, so I do that, and I'll also put a banner logo so I can have my own customer logo right there. This appears to be pixelated but should be fine once the user logs in. I'll also put a sign-in page banner disclaimer here. So legal disclaimer. Put that in caps. Employees of the company may log in. Alright. Only. And then save this. Alright. Just waiting for this to get saved. Now once that is saved, we'll let Joe log in one more time to myapps.microsoft.com and verify if they can see the custom logos. Alright, looks like it is saved. I will go to in private mode, go to myapps.microsoft.com. The case doesn't matter though, and then log in with Joe at domain.com. I know I'm missing something here very badly, and it's full email address without any special characters. Now as soon as I hit next, it should identify that I'm from a different domain, and look at that, the background changes. Now although I punched my password, don't forget to look at this section. Now you have the legal disclaimer right there. Click on sign in. This user called Joe must get his enterprise-wide applications plus the custom logo, which it looks like this on the top left hand side. That's how branding is done. Microsoft has tons of applications within their enterprise applications gallery, and we can access them and publish them right from this console. If we click on this enterprise applications, we will be able to see all the applications that can be published to users. And as you see, we got few of the Office 365 apps. One of them is Visual Studio. But if the application that you would like to publish to the users is not in this list, then you can click on New Application, and then you will see lots of applications categorized based on their purpose. So you scroll down, there's a lot of them here. Few of the favorite ones are just listed here. Add from the gallery, so we can publish some of these applications to the users. We can just pick and choose any one of these to publish to the users. Let's say I will publish an application called as Dropbox for Business. Now all I gotta do is click on Add. Once the addition is complete, you should be able to see that in this list, in the applications list. I'll refresh it once to see if that appears in the enterprise application list, and then thereafter I will be able to publish this application to the users. So in the next video, we'll see how we can publish it to the users, and once a user logs into myapps.microsoft.com, and how they can access such enterprise applications. I have this application called Dropbox for Business for the users, and my intention is to publish this application to my users who got synchronized from on-premise to Active Directory. To publish them, I will go to application registrations and I must see all the applications that we have so far. And there's just one application there which is called Dropbox for Business. I'll click on it to navigate to the application, and then you can look at the settings, what this user has, who the owners are, what permissions this application has. But my intention is to publish this particular application to the users. So I'll go to the app from Enterprise Applications, click on it and wait while it opens up. There you go. Now we've got a lot more options. At this time, this application is not published to any user. Nobody's using it, right? Now you can either publish to the users or groups that have been synchronized from AD or have been explicitly created in AD. I can add user, then click on this option called users and groups and select my user or the groups. I can just search for the user. Before we do that, you can see that all the Active Directory groups and users are in this list. You can search for them as well. I'll say Joe, and Joe is now a member of this group who can access this particular application. Now that I have one user called Joe published and he can access the enterprise application called Dropbox, let's go ahead and verify that. I'm going to launch the in private mode right away and go to the same link called myapps.microsoft.com and log in with this user account. Okay, I'm forgetting something here. It's the full email address because it's not registered, and type my credentials. I should see my user called Joe accessing or having the Dropbox application published to him. There you go. So you are able to see it. So you just have to go to the applications and publish it to the users, and thereafter the user called Joe must be able to access the applications right from here. In the next video, we'll see how we can publish custom applications. Like, for example, if you have created an application in web apps, and how do you publish such custom in-house application to the users rather than publishing the ones in the marketplace. I've created one application in web app and I call it as Great Photography.